Ever felt like your own mind is both your greatest gift and your heaviest burden? Like the very thing that makes you sharp, perceptive, and capable also makes life unbearably complicated. Imagine sitting in a room full of people who are laughing, smiling, and celebrating the moment. Their joy looks real, their enthusiasm feels genuine, but you can't shake the gnawing sensation that something is missing. You see through it all, the layers of pretense, the hollow rituals, the empty chatter, and instead of feeling connected, you feel like an actor who's been handed the wrong script. Everyone else seems perfectly content to play their roles, but you can't unsee the stage lights, the painted backdrop, the illusion that keeps the show running. That's the hidden reality of intelligence. The more you see, the harder it becomes to unsee. The more you know, the harder it becomes to pretend. Intelligence is sold to us as a blessing, a ticket to success, power, and admiration. But what nobody tells you is that intelligence often feels like living inside a prison of your own awareness. You're surrounded by people, but you feel alone. You're applauded for your insight, but secretly punished for your honesty. You're expected to play along with the game, even when you've figured out the rules, spotted the cheats, and realized the prizes aren't even real. Most people never talk about this. Society loves to paint the intelligent as winners, the visionaries, the leaders, the ones with answers. But for many, the truth is far more uncomfortable. Intelligence doesn't always lead to power. Sometimes it leads to paralysis. It doesn't always bring joy. Sometimes it magnifies despair, and it doesn't always bring connection. Often, it leads to a kind of isolation so deep it feels like exile. Not because you've rejected society, but because society has no place for someone who refuses to close their eyes to its illusions. Think about how this plays out in daily life. You sit at a dinner table, where everyone is excitedly discussing the latest trend, a viral video, a celebrity scandal. People are animated, engaged, genuinely thrilled by the conversation, and you nod, you smile, you force yourself to play along, but inside you're asking, how can anyone care this much about something so meaningless? It's not arrogance, it's not even judgment, it's a kind of existential exhaustion. Your brain is operating on a frequency that tunes into deeper questions, larger patterns, invisible forces shaping the world. And while everyone else is entertained, you're burdened with the knowledge that most of it doesn't matter. That's not fun. That's torture. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him." He wasn't being cruel. He was being brutally accurate. For the average person, life feels simple, direct, even comforting. There's a job to do, a family to raise, goals to chase, pleasures to enjoy. The mystery never really intrudes, but for the intelligent mind, the mystery never goes away. In fact, it deepens. The more you learn, the more you realize how little you truly know. The more you think, the more contradictions you uncover. The more you observe, the more absurdities you notice. And every layer you peel back reveals not clarity, but complexity. That complexity becomes a constant companion. It whispers to you in the middle of conversations. It lingers in the silence after social gatherings. It shows up in the most ordinary moments, reminding you that nothing is as simple as it appears. And that weight, it's invisible to others, but crushing to you. People assume intelligence is freedom. In reality, it often feels like shackles. You can't switch it off. You can't unlearn what you know. You can't close your eyes and pretend the way everyone else seems to. Worse still, intelligence isolates you not just from ignorance, but from belonging. Human beings crave connection, but connection requires common ground. And when your mind constantly drifts toward the deeper, darker, or more complex layers of reality, you often find yourself stranded on an island nobody else can or wants to visit. Conversations that others find fulfilling feel shallow to you. Social rituals that others embrace feel exhausting to you. The very things that bring people together often push you further away, and slowly, almost without noticing, you begin to withdraw, not out of bitterness, not out of superiority, but out of necessity. Because every moment spent pretending is a little betrayal of yourself, and those betrayals pile up until you can't carry them anymore. This is why intelligence so often breeds solitude, not because intelligent people don't want others, but because others often can't meet them where they live. It's like speaking a rare language in a crowd where no one understands you. You can talk all you want, but in the end, you're just conversing with yourself while surrounded by noise. And that's a special kind of loneliness. A loneliness that eats at the soul, not because you're alone, but because you're unseen. Here's the paradox. Society says it wants brilliance, creativity, originality. It celebrates the lone genius in movies, quotes philosophers on social media, and praises innovation in theory. But in practice, society wants comfort, not disruption. It wants validation, not truth. It wants the illusion of progress, not the discomfort of transformation. And so the intelligent mind becomes a kind of double-edged sword, valued when it entertains, resented when it challenges, praised when it agrees, punished when it dissents. The very clarity that could help society evolve becomes the very reason it pushes you to the margins. So where does this leave the intelligent person? Trapped. Trapped between the desire to belong and the inability to pretend. Trapped between the need for connection and the demand for authenticity. Trapped between the burden of seeing too much and the pain of being misunderstood. This trap isn't just intellectual, it's emotional, psychological, existential. It's the silent weight behind every forced smile, every shallow conversation, every moment you wish you could shut your brain off just long enough to feel what everyone else seems to. But here's the uncomfortable truth. This trap isn't going away. Intelligence doesn't fade once awakened. Awareness doesn't roll back once expanded. Once you've seen behind the curtain, you can't go back to the bliss of ignorance. And maybe, just maybe, that's not a curse at all, but the beginning of something deeper, something harder, something truer. Because intelligence, for all its burdens, also carries a power that few recognize, the power to see differently, to question relentlessly, to resist conformity, to carve out a path of authenticity, even when it costs you belonging. And that power, though lonely, is the foundation of every breakthrough, every revolution, every leap forward humanity has ever made. So if you've ever felt trapped by your own intelligence, if you've ever wondered why the world feels so hollow while your mind feels so heavy, don't worry, you're not broken. You're not doomed. You're simply living in a reality that most people can't yet perceive. And the story of what that does to a human being, that's exactly what we're about to uncover. Picture yourself at a party. The music is loud, the drinks are flowing, people are laughing and leaning into conversations they believe are full of depth. To them, it's the perfect night connection, fun, belonging. But for you, it feels like you've stumbled onto a stage play where everyone else knows their lines, and you're stuck improvising a role you don't even believe in. You smile when you're supposed to. You laugh at the jokes. You nod at the stories. But inside, you're screaming, because you can see the strings. You know the plot is fake, the actors are lost in delusion, and the entire performance is built on a script that doesn't make sense anymore. That's what it feels like to live inside the mental prison of intelligence. Your brain, sharp as it may be, doesn't just process the surface of life, it dissects it. You can't just enjoy the magic trick. You see the sleight of hand, the hidden compartment, the wires behind the illusion. And the moment you see it, the wonder evaporates. Everyone else is still enchanted, but you're left holding the truth, staring at the gears that make the illusion spin. That awareness doesn't liberate you. It chains you, because now you can't participate sincerely. You can't join in the laughter without feeling the hollowness echo in your chest. Conversations that should feel lighthearted start to feel like chores. You hear people arguing passionately about celebrity gossip, workplace drama, or the latest trend, and all you can think is, does any of this actually matter? For them, yes, it matters deeply. For you, it feels like being forced to play pretend with stakes so low they're practically invisible. And here's the cruel irony. You can fake it, but the faking costs you. Every shallow laugh feels like sandpaper against your integrity. Every false smile chips away at your sense of self. And every time you silence your real thoughts just to blend in, you build another brick in the walls of your mental prison. The truth is, intelligence doesn't just expand what you understand, it expands what you can't ignore. You see contradictions everywhere. You catch logical fallacies that slip past others without notice. You hear the emotional manipulation in a politician's speech while the crowd applauds. You recognize the manufactured desire in an advertisement while everyone else rushes to buy. You notice the shallow power plays in the office while your coworkers treat them like gospel truth. It's like your mind is tuned to a frequency most people can't even hear, and instead of feeling empowered, you feel trapped by your own perception. And the worst part? You can't switch it off. You can't dim the lights in your brain or blur the edges to soften the view. Once the veil is lifted, it stays lifted. Once the curtain is pulled back, the actors never look the same. You're not allowed the luxury of ignorance anymore. And with that awareness comes a relentless stream of dissonance. The world that once seemed simple now feels unbearably artificial. The conversations that once brought joy now feel hollow. The traditions that once gave meaning now seem like recycled scripts. And you're the lone sober person in a room full of intoxicated minds, asked to drink from the same poisoned well just to keep the peace. This prison isn't made of walls. It's made of perception. It's built from the endless awareness that the world runs on illusions. Most people never question. Think about it. Society thrives on consensus, not truth. It runs on shared beliefs, shared myths, shared agreements. Money, politics, status, trends. These are fragile illusions held together because enough people choose to believe in them. And here you are, the person who can see the cracks in every illusion. The person who spots the emperor's nakedness while everyone else insists he's clothed. Do you speak up and risk rejection, or do you stay silent and betray yourself? That's the impossible choice that intelligent people face every day. And slowly, the choice becomes no choice at all. Silence wins. Pretending wins. Because society punishes the truth teller, not the liar. It rewards the comfort giver, not the disruptor. And so you learn to ration your real opinions like contraband. You save them for rare conversations with the few who might understand. You edit your thoughts down to their least threatening form. You dilute your insights until they no longer carry their original weight. And little by little, the prison closes in. Not because you don't have the key, but because nobody else wants to step outside with you. What good is freedom if it means being alone in the wilderness while everyone else dances in chains? This is why so many intelligent people eventually retreat. The prison becomes unbearable, not because of what they see, but because of what they must suppress. The dissonance of living one way on the outside while knowing another truth on the inside corrodes them from within. It's a kind of double life, a performance that leaves them drained, disillusioned, and disconnected. And as much as society likes to romanticize intelligence as a superpower, the reality is far less glamorous. Intelligence without understanding, without community, without authenticity, often becomes nothing more than a set of bars trapping you in a reality you didn't choose. But here's where the story turns darker and more fascinating. Because this prison doesn't just trap you, it reshapes you. It teaches you habits of silence, masks of conformity, layers of performance. It forces you to ration your authenticity, to carefully measure how much truth the world can tolerate without rejecting you outright. And over time, you start to forget what it feels like to speak freely, to be fully known, to belong without compromise. That's not living, that's surviving. And for many intelligent people, that survival becomes the default mode of existence. The mental prison of intelligence isn't about arrogance. It's not about thinking you're better than others. It's about seeing too much, too clearly, too often, and realizing that clarity doesn't free you, it isolates you. It builds invisible walls between you and the world, walls made not of malice, but of misunderstanding. And until you acknowledge those walls, until you understand the cost of seeing the world too clearly, you'll never understand why solitude feels less like a choice and more like a sentence carried out by the weight of your own mind. But here's the question we now have to ask. If intelligence can feel like such a prison, and why did Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest philosophers in history, believe that intelligence doesn't make life clearer, but stranger, darker, and infinitely more complex? Arthur Schopenhauer wasn't the kind of philosopher who sugarcoated life. He didn't dress it up in comforting illusions or sell happiness as a guarantee of existence. No, Schopenhauer ripped the mask off reality and forced people to stare into the raw, uncomfortable truths that most would rather ignore. His work is infamous for being dark, pessimistic, even brutal. But here's the reason he matters to our story. Schopenhauer understood something that society still refuses to admit, that intelligence isn't a straight path to joy or success. In fact, he argued the opposite. Intelligence makes life heavier, not lighter, more complex, not clearer, more painful, not peaceful. He once dropped a truth bomb that resonates like a hammer strike against the illusions of the modern world. The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. At first glance, it sounds like an insult, a jab at those who are content with simple lives and straightforward explanations. But that wasn't his point. Schopenhauer wasn't mocking the average person. He was pointing out the cruel paradox of intelligence. The less you think, the easier it is to accept the world as it is. The more you think, the more you're forced to confront questions that have no easy answers, mysteries that can't be solved, contradictions that can't be resolved. And that, right there, is the dark heart of intelligence. The deeper your awareness, the less peace you find in the surface-level narratives everyone else clings to. The average person sees a world full of purpose, meaning, and order. The intelligent person sees a world riddled with chaos, complexity, and unanswered questions. For one, life is a story. For the other, life is an endless puzzle with missing pieces. Think about how this plays out in real time. For most people, existence feels relatively straightforward. You're born, you grow, you work, you build relationships, you pursue goals, and eventually you fade out of the story. There's comfort in that structure. Comfort in the assumption that life has a clear arc, a purpose handed down by culture, religion, or tradition. But the more intelligent you are, the harder it is to accept that script at face value. You start asking questions that unsettle the entire narrative. What's the actual purpose of any of this? Why do we chase goals that vanish the moment they're achieved? Why do we cling to traditions that crumble under scrutiny? And worse, what if there isn't a purpose at all? These are not questions society rewards. In fact, they're questions society actively suppresses, because if too many people start asking them, the entire illusion of stability begins to crack. Most people don't want the cracks. They want comfort. They want certainty. They want the sense that everything makes sense. And so when an intelligent person starts pulling at the threads, exposing the fragility of the fabric, they're not seen as insightful. They're seen as dangerous, as disruptive, as the one ruining the game for everyone else. Schopenhauer understood this tension intimately. He believed that intelligence magnifies suffering precisely because it strips away the protective illusions that make life bearable. The average person can live inside the stories of their culture, the promises of religion, the reassurances of tradition, the distractions of entertainment. But the intelligent mind sees through them all. And once you see through them, they lose their power to comfort. Faith becomes doubt. Tradition becomes absurdity. Entertainment becomes hollow. And what's left? The raw, unfiltered weight of existence pressing down like a storm cloud that never clears. To Schopenhauer, this wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was the defining feature of intelligence itself. Awareness doesn't liberate. It alienates. Knowledge doesn't soothe. It unsettles. Clarity doesn't simplify. It complicates. The very process of thinking deeply leads you further away from the bliss of ignorance and deeper into the torment of uncertainty. And the cruelest part, there's no going back. Once your eyes adjust to the darker layers of reality, you can't unsee them. You can't return to the comfort of surface-level explanations, no matter how much you might wish you could. This is why intelligent people often feel so estranged from the world around them. While others are content to build their lives around jobs, social status, consumer goods, or shallow pleasures, the intelligent mind struggles to find satisfaction in any of it. They see the impermanence, the manipulation, the fragility. They see how quickly trends fade, how easily power corrupts, how often pleasure disappoints. And instead of feeling fulfilled, they feel alienated. Instead of belonging, they feel out of place. Instead of resting in the normal rhythms of life, they feel like they're standing on the outside, looking in at a play that no longer makes sense. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Schopenhauer wasn't just diagnosing a problem. He was pointing out a fundamental truth about the human condition. Intelligence changes your relationship to reality itself. It doesn't just change what you know, it changes what you can unsee. Once you understand how propaganda works, political speeches stop being inspiring. Once you understand how advertising manipulates psychology, commercials stop being entertaining. Once you understand the mechanisms of social hierarchies, office politics stop being tolerable. Once you understand the fragility of existence, the reassurances people live by stop feeling real. And that shift, once it happens, creates a permanent gap between the intelligent person and the crowd. You can't walk back across that bridge. You can only stand on your side, watching the others live in blissful illusions, wishing sometimes that you could rejoin them, but knowing it's impossible. That's the prison Schopenhauer was talking about. Not bars of steel, but bars of awareness. A prison built by questions that never stop, answers that never satisfy, and mysteries that only deepen the longer you stare into them. But here's the kicker. Schopenhauer didn't think this was all bad. He believed there was value in solitude, in embracing the discomfort of intelligence rather than fighting it. He saw the burden as a signal that you were capable of living outside the illusions that trap most people. Yes, it was painful. Yes, it was alienating. But it was also the soil in which originality, creativity, and authenticity could grow. Intelligence was a curse in terms of comfort, but it was also a blessing in terms of truth. And he believed truth, no matter how harsh, was always preferable to the lie. So when Schopenhauer declared that the unintelligent live in simplicity while the intelligent are haunted by mystery, he wasn't sneering at ignorance. He was telling us that the cost of clarity is isolation, that the price of deep awareness is loneliness, and that the only way to survive the burden of intelligence is to stop expecting it to bring peace and start using it to carve a different kind of life altogether. Which raises the next uncomfortable question. If intelligence doesn't bring belonging and society punishes those who refuse to play along, what happens to those who can't or won't unsee the truth? How do they survive in a world that thrives on illusions? And what does their constant awareness do to their ability to connect with others, to find meaning, to live without drowning in the weight of their own perception? Once you reach a certain level of awareness, everyday life begins to look different. The same conversations, the same rituals, the same routines that once seemed normal suddenly feel artificial. Like a magician's trick you've seen too many times, the charm fades, the illusion collapses, and you can't help but notice the wires, the mirrors, the hidden compartments behind every performance. This is the curse of seeing the world too clearly. What others mistake for magic, you recognize as sleight of hand. What others treat as sacred, you recognize as strategy. What others accept as natural, you see as constructed. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Imagine walking through a crowded marketplace. To most people, it's vibrant, colorful, alive with possibility. To you, it's a theater of manipulation. Every stall is arranged to catch the eye. Every special deal is a carefully crafted illusion of scarcity. Every cheerful vendor is deploying psychological tactics to lower your defenses. The crowd is hypnotized, buying without thinking, laughing without noticing. And you stand in the middle of it all, seeing the puppet strings that no one else even realizes exist. It doesn't make you feel clever. It makes you feel alien. Because while they're playing the game, you're watching the rules being written in real time. This is what intelligence does. It peels away the comforting layers of illusion and exposes the mechanics underneath. Politics becomes propaganda. Religion becomes ritual. Advertising becomes psychological warfare. Social hierarchies become status games dressed up as morality. What others take at face value, you see as performance, and instead of feeling connected to the spectacle, you feel repelled by it, because you can't join in sincerely once you know how it works. It's like watching a rerun of a show where you already know the ending. You can pretend to be surprised, but deep down, the spark is gone. That's the exhausting part about seeing too much. It doesn't just ruin illusions, it ruins participation. How do you clap at a speech when you know it's designed to manipulate emotion rather than present truth? How do you cheer for a product when you understand the marketing team engineered your desire long before you ever felt it? How do you invest in office politics when you see them for the petty power plays they really are? You can't, not authentically. And every time you try, every time you pretend, you feel the dissonance growing. You're not really part of the group. You're an outsider wearing a mask, nodding along while your mind screams, "Can't you see what's happening here?" And that's when the gap begins to widen. The intelligent person becomes not just a different thinker, but a different kind of participant in life. Or for others, life is about immersion. For the intelligent, life becomes about observation. You're not swept along by the current. You're standing on the bank, watching everyone else drift downstream, wondering why no one questions where the river leads. And here's the kicker. They don't want you to point it out. They don't want you to break the spell. They want you to keep quiet and let them believe, because truth is rarely welcome when it threatens the comfort of the crowd. Lower, this is why intelligent people so often feel like intruders in their own communities. They're not hostile. They're not trying to ruin the fun. They're just unable to switch off the part of their brain that sees the cracks in the foundation. They notice the logical fallacies in every argument, the contradictions in every belief system, the inconsistencies in every plan. And while everyone else is comfortable glossing over them, the intelligent mind can't let them go. It's not arrogance, it's compulsion. Once you see the glitch in the matrix, you can't stop noticing it everywhere. The matrix metaphor is perfect here. In the film, Neo takes the red pill and wakes up to the horrifying truth that the world he thought was real is nothing but a simulation. At first, the truth seems liberating, but as the story unfolds, you realize the truth is also isolating. You can't go back. You can't unknow. You can't reinsert yourself into the illusion without feeling fake. That's the reality for intelligent people who see too clearly. The bliss of ignorance is gone, and in its place is a clarity that feels more like exile than enlightenment. And society, let's be honest, doesn't reward clarity. It rewards conformity. The person who cheers, who agrees, who goes along, who maintains the illusion, those are the people who thrive in groups. The person who raises their hand and says, "Wait a second, this doesn't make sense," that's the person who gets silenced, ridiculed, or pushed aside, not because they're wrong, but because they're disruptive. Truth doesn't bind groups together. Shared illusions do. And so, the truth teller becomes a threat, not to reality, but to consensus. And in a society built on consensus, threats aren't tolerated. This is why intelligent people often end up in exhausting positions. They either silence themselves to preserve harmony, or they speak up and risk rejection. Either way, they pay a price. Silence feels like betrayal of their authenticity. Speaking feels like betrayal of their belonging. It's a no-win scenario, a psychological trap that leaves them drained no matter what choice they make. And over time, that drain becomes unbearable. The cost of seeing too much isn't just loneliness, it's exhaustion. The exhaustion of living in a world where you must constantly translate what you see into something others can tolerate hearing. But here's the most brutal part. Seeing too much doesn't just alienate you from others, it alienates you from joy. Once you understand how illusions work, it becomes harder to lose yourself in them. Movies feel predictable. Social events feel scripted. Achievements feel hollow. Even love, the most profound of human experiences, can feel fragile when you see the psychological patterns that drive attraction, the cultural scripts that shape romance, the subconscious forces that play out like clockwork. You want to feel, to believe, to immerse, but your mind keeps whispering, "Look closer, this too is a construct." And so, the intelligent person finds themselves standing in a paradox. Their clarity, the very thing that should empower them, instead becomes the reason they feel powerless. Their vision, the very thing that should guide them, instead becomes the reason they can't walk the same path as others. They've swallowed the red pill, and the cost of knowing is never being able to unknow. This is the heavy burden of seeing the world too clearly. It creates a chasm between you and the crowd, a chasm that can't be bridged by pretending. And once that chasm opens, society doesn't embrace you. It pushes you further to the margins, because groups don't need truth tellers. They need consensus builders. And if intelligence forces you to see what others can't or won't, then you're destined to live on the outside, carrying a vision that few will ever understand. But here's the next uncomfortable question. If society punishes clarity and rewards conformity, what does that mean for the intelligent person who refuses to play along? What happens when your very existence becomes a threat to the group's fragile illusions? The answer reveals the first brutal reality of intelligence, and it's not one most people want to hear. If there's one brutal reality that intelligent people learn early, it's this: society doesn't actually want the truth. It wants comfort. It wants stability. It wants the kind of pleasant illusions that keep the machinery of daily life running without disruption. And when someone dares to puncture those illusions, no matter how accurate or well-intentioned, The reaction isn't gratitude, it's hostility. The truth teller becomes the problem, not because they're wrong, but because they threaten the fragile consensus that holds the group together. Think about it. When was the last time you saw a group of people celebrate someone for pointing out a hard, uncomfortable truth? It doesn't happen. More often, the truth teller is labeled negative, difficult, or cynical. People don't gather around to applaud their accuracy. They turn on them, because what they've revealed undermines the very stories the group needs to believe in to function. A company doesn't want the employee who points out that the business model is flawed. A political party doesn't want the supporter who notices hypocrisy in its policies. A family doesn't want the relative who questions the traditions everyone clings to. Groups aren't built on facts. They're built on agreement, and agreement requires ignoring, minimizing, or flat-out denying the cracks in the narrative. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He argued that mediocrity thrives in crowds because crowds depend on conformity, not clarity. The average person doesn't want to think too deeply or question too much. They want to belong. They want to fit in. They want to feel normal. And feeling normal requires agreeing on what's reasonable, acceptable, and true, even when that truth is riddled with contradictions. Anyone who steps outside of that shared narrative, anyone who dares to shine a light on its flaws, is seen as a threat to cohesion, and cohesion always wins out over accuracy. That's why truth tellers are rarely rewarded. They're punished, not because their insights lack value, but because their value comes at the expense of comfort. Imagine being in a meeting where everyone is congratulating themselves on a plan that's destined to fail. If you speak up and explain why it won't work, you don't get applause for your foresight. You get glares for breaking the mood. You've disrupted the group's collective belief, and in doing so, you've made yourself the enemy. Accuracy is irrelevant. What matters is that you've punctured the illusion that kept everyone comfortable. The same dynamic plays out in every area of life. Politics doesn't reward the truth teller who exposes corruption. It rewards the charismatic speaker who inspires belief. Religion doesn't reward the skeptic who asks unanswerable questions. It rewards the faithful who reinforce doctrine. Social groups don't reward the member who points out hypocrisy. They reward the loyal friend who goes along to get along. In short, the crowd doesn't want clarity. It wants cohesion, and anyone who threatens that cohesion, no matter how intelligent or insightful, is pushed to the margins. This is why intelligent people so often feel like outcasts. It's not that they're incapable of belonging. It's that belonging requires silence. It requires overlooking the flaws they can't help but notice. It requires going along with illusions they can't unsee. And while they can fake it for a while, the act wears them down, because every time they suppress the truth, every time they bite their tongue, every time they nod along to something they know is false, they chip away at their authenticity, and eventually, that erosion becomes unbearable. The truth teller's dilemma is simple but devastating. Be silent and betray yourself, or speak up and risk rejection. Neither path is painless. Silence corrodes you from within. Speaking isolates you from without. And this no-win scenario is why so many intelligent people withdraw. It's not that they hate others. It's that they're exhausted from the cost of constant compromise. Exhausted from performing. Exhausted from censoring. Exhausted from carrying insights that no one wants to hear. And here's the irony. History shows us that progress almost always comes from those who dared to reject consensus. The whistleblowers, the innovators, the philosophers, the artists who refused to conform. These are the people who pushed humanity forward, but in their own time, they were often ridiculed, punished, or ignored. Socrates was sentenced to death for asking too many questions. Galileo was condemned for pointing out scientific truths that contradicted the church. Visionaries are celebrated only in hindsight. In the moment, they're treated as threats. The very clarity that makes them valuable is the very clarity that gets them cast out. This creates a strange paradox for the intelligent person. On one hand, they know their insights matter. They know they're seeing something real, something important, something others are blind to. On the other hand, they know that sharing those insights will only bring trouble, and so they sit in silence, carrying truths that could help but won't be heard. The burden isn't just seeing too much, it's knowing that most of what you see can never be spoken aloud without consequence. And society, of course, reinforces this lesson over and over. The child who points out flaws in a teacher's reasoning is scolded for being disruptive. The teenager who questions cultural traditions is labeled rebellious. The adult who challenges corporate practices is branded difficult. The message is clear from every direction. Don't rock the boat. Don't challenge the narrative. Don't tell the truth if it makes people uncomfortable. Keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, and go along. That's the recipe for belonging. That's the price of acceptance. But for the intelligent person, this is a price too steep to pay forever. Because truth isn't just an intellectual concern. It's a psychological necessity. To suppress it constantly is to suffocate. To silence it indefinitely is to fracture yourself in two. And so, the intelligent mind eventually realizes that belonging, at least in the way society defines it, might be impossible. Because belonging requires pretending, and pretending feels like betrayal, which means the only real choice left is between acceptance by others or authenticity for yourself. And for most intelligent people, authenticity wins. Not because it's easier, it isn't, but because living without it feels unbearable. This is why truth-tellers are rejected, isolated, and misunderstood. Not because they're wrong, but because they refuse to prioritize comfort over clarity. They refuse to protect illusions at the expense of truth. They refuse to play along with a script they know is false. And while that makes them pariahs in the eyes of the group, it also makes them free in ways the group will never understand. Free to think, free to question, free to live in alignment with what they see, even if it costs them the warmth of belonging. But here's the price of that freedom: exhaustion. Because living as a perpetual truth-teller isn't just isolating, it's draining. It turns every conversation into a balancing act, every interaction into a performance, every relationship into a negotiation between honesty and acceptance. And eventually, that drain becomes so heavy that many intelligent people step away altogether. They retreat, not because they hate humanity, but because humanity has shown them, time and time again, that it doesn't want what they have to offer. And this brings us to the next layer of the burden: the psychological cost of pretending. If society punishes those who tell the truth, then what happens to those who keep trying to fit in? What toll does it take on the mind to constantly filter, edit, and disguise yourself just to survive in the crowd? For the highly intelligent, one of the greatest burdens isn't just seeing too much, it's pretending not to. It's the endless performance of acting like you belong to a world that often feels like theater. Day after day, conversation after conversation, you're forced to translate your real thoughts into socially acceptable soundbites. You ration your honesty. You censor your depth. You clip your wings so others won't feel uncomfortable in your presence. And while this performance may win you a place in the group, it drains something far more valuable: your authenticity. Every fake smile is a small fracture. Every forced laugh is a cut. Every aha you give when someone raves about something shallow. Every nod you offer when someone repeats a cliché you know is hollow. These moments seem small, but they accumulate. and what they accumulate into is a double life. On the outside, you're agreeable, sociable, normal. On the inside, you're restless, suffocated, starving for something real. That gap between who you are and who you have to pretend to be becomes a psychological chasm, and the more you maintain it, the heavier the weight grows. Think of it like being a translator who never gets to speak their native language. You're fluent in the tongue of surface-level conversation, but it's not your true voice. Every sentence requires effort. Every expression is a calculation. You're constantly converting what you really think into what others can tolerate, what you really feel into what others can accept. And after years of this, it doesn't just exhaust you, it begins to erode you. You forget what it feels like to speak freely, to be fully understood, to let your thoughts and emotions flow without restraint. Pretending doesn't just hide who you are, it chips away at your memory of who that even is. This is why socializing, for highly intelligent people, so often feels like labor. While others may leave gatherings energized, you leave drained, not because you dislike people, but because every interaction feels like a performance. Small talk isn't small to you, it's a marathon. Polite chatter isn't easy, it's suffocating. To the outside world, you seem engaged, but on the inside, you're calculating every word, editing every sentence, suppressing every instinct to say what you really think. It's not conversation, it's code switching, and the cost is heavy. Over time, this constant performance creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the tension of living in conflict with your own truth. You say one thing, but believe another. You smile when you want to frown. You agree when you want to object. You play along when you want to walk away. And every time you do, the dissonance grows. The mind can handle it for a while, but not forever. Eventually, the dissonance turns into stress, the stress into anxiety, the anxiety into exhaustion. Some call it burnout, but for intelligent people, it's deeper. It's not just the exhaustion of work, it's the exhaustion of living as a divided self. And then comes the breaking point. For many highly intelligent people, there's a moment when they realize that their relationships, their friendships, even their careers are built not on who they truly are, but on the persona they've constructed to survive. People don't actually know them. They know the mask, the carefully curated, diluted version of themselves that plays well in groups, but bears little resemblance to the real person underneath. And that realization is devastating, because it forces a question that cuts to the core. If nobody knows me as I really am, do I actually belong anywhere at all? That's the psychological cost of pretending, not just exhaustion but alienation. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely unseen. You can be the life of the party and still feel utterly alone, because the person they're connecting with isn't you. It's the persona you've created. And every moment they accept that persona, you're reminded of the painful truth: they don't know you. They only know the version you've allowed them to see. Now, let's add another layer to the cost. Pretending doesn't just drain you, it distorts you. When you're constantly rationing your true self, you begin to internalize the belief that your authentic thoughts and feelings aren't safe to express. You train yourself to hold back, to edit, to conform, and before long, that becomes habit. You start censoring yourself even when nobody's watching. You stop chasing certain interests because they won't be understood. You stop voicing certain insights because they'll make people uncomfortable. Slowly, you shrink your own existence to fit inside the box society has handed you, and the tragedy is, you may not even notice it happening until years have passed, and you realize you've lost track of who you really are. This is why so many intelligent people eventually retreat into solitude. It's not because they hate others, It's not because they think they're superior. It's because the cost of pretending becomes unbearable. Solitude for them is not about avoiding connection. It's about reclaiming authenticity. Alone, they can drop the mask. Alone, they can think at full speed, feel at full depth, speak in their true voice. Alone, they don't have to waste energy translating their thoughts into something palatable. Alone, they can finally stop pretending. But here's the paradox. Solitude heals, but it also separates by stepping away. Intelligent people regain their authenticity, but they lose what little belonging they had in the first place. They trade one kind of pain for another, the pain of pretending for the pain of isolation. And for many, that's the lesser evil. Because while isolation is lonely, pretending is soul-crushing. At least in solitude, you are whole. At least in solitude, you are true. Schopenhauer himself warned of this cost. He said that constant socializing dissipates mental energy like water leaking from a cracked vessel. Every shallow interaction drains you, every forced conversation chips away at you, until there's nothing left to give. And the intelligent mind, with its heightened sensitivity, feels this drain more acutely than most. It's like running a high-performance engine on the wrong fuel. You can force it to run, but eventually it burns out. That's what pretending does. It burns you out from the inside. And yet, society continues to demand the performance. It continues to punish those who refuse to play along, which leaves intelligent people with few options. They can either keep pretending and slowly erode themselves, or step away and face the loneliness of solitude. Most choose solitude, not because it's easy, but because at least it's honest. At least it allows them to stop betraying themselves. But here's the question that remains. If solitude becomes the only refuge for authenticity, why does society view it as a problem? Why is the intelligent person who retreats to protect their sanity labeled antisocial, depressed, or broken? Why can't solitude be recognized for what it really is? A survival strategy, a necessity, even a form of liberation. When society talks about solitude, it usually paints it as a problem. Being alone is treated like a sign that something's wrong with you, like you're antisocial, shy, broken, or depressed. But for the highly intelligent, solitude isn't a defect. It's not a weakness. It's survival. It's the one environment where the constant strain of pretending lifts, where the noise of shallow chatter fades, and where the mind finally has room to breathe. For intelligent people, solitude isn't an escape from life. It's the only place life starts to feel authentic. Here's why. Intelligent minds run differently. They don't process the world at surface level. They dive deep. They see patterns, connections, contradictions that others miss. That intensity doesn't shut off just because they're at a party, in a meeting, or making small talk. Their brain is always running in high gear, always asking questions, always spotting inconsistencies. And when they're surrounded by people who can't or won't engage with that depth, the result is exhaustion. Every social interaction feels like running a marathon with weights strapped to your ankles. Solitude, by contrast, is like finally untying those weights. It's a return to your natural rhythm. Think of solitude as a kind of recharging station. When average people spend time with others, they often feel energized. Group life feeds them. But for intelligent people, the opposite is true. Group life drains them. Every shallow exchange, every forced smile, every moment of code switching siphons away their mental energy. By the end of a long day of socializing, they feel like their battery has been drained to zero. Solitude is how they plug back in. Alone time restores the clarity that group life depletes. Silence recharges the creativity that shallow conversation smothers. Space revives the authenticity that constant pretending erodes. Without solitude, the intelligent mind burns out. With it, the mind flourishes. But solitude isn't just about rest. It's also about freedom. In solitude, there's no need to translate your thoughts into something others can digest. No need to ration your insights, censor your opinions, or water down your curiosity. You can think in your own language, at your own speed, with your full depth. That's when the breakthroughs happen. That's when original ideas emerge. That's when creativity comes alive. History proves this. Einstein didn't conceive relativity in a brainstorming session. Newton didn't discover gravity during a committee meeting. Darwin didn't write about evolution at a dinner party. These revelations were born in solitude, in the quiet spaces where deep thought had the room to grow. This is why solitude is often the natural habitat of the highly intelligent, not because they dislike people, but because people rarely create the conditions their minds need to thrive. Society is noisy, demanding, full of pressure to conform. Solitude is quiet, liberating, full of space to be yourself. Society bends your thoughts to fit the group. Solitude allows your thoughts to stretch into places no group would ever go. In solitude, you're no longer playing a role. You're no longer filtering yourself through 1,000 invisible rules. You're simply you. Raw, unedited, authentic. And here's where we confront a painful contradiction. Society claims to value intelligence. It celebrates innovation, quotes philosophers, worships creative geniuses. But in practice, society is allergic to the very conditions that allow intelligence to flourish. It demands constant availability, endless socializing, perpetual conformity. It ridicules people who choose solitude, labeling them loners, weirdos, or antisocial misfits. In reality, it's not that solitude is unhealthy. It's that society is uncomfortable with what solitude produces, because solitude produces independence. It produces authenticity. It produces truths that often challenge the illusions groups depend on, and groups don't like their illusions challenged. So the intelligent person faces a choice: conform to the demands of constant socializing and erode themselves in the process, or retreat into solitude and risk being misunderstood. Most choose solitude, not because it's easier, it isn't, but because it's the only path that allows them to remain whole. Pretending is a slow death. Solitude is survival, and once you experience the freedom of living in alignment with your true self, the cost of conformity becomes unbearable. Now, let's take this further. Solitude doesn't just restore energy, it sharpens perception. When you step away from the noise of the crowd, you start to notice the ways social pressure subtly bends thought. You see how conversations pull people toward consensus, how groupthink erodes individuality, how subtle disapproval reshapes behavior. From the outside, you see just how powerful and how dangerous the collective mind can be. And once you've seen it, you realize solitude isn't just survival for you, it's resistance. It's a way of protecting your autonomy against the constant erosion of conformity. Schopenhauer understood this perfectly. He described the crowd as a corrupting force, one that bends the will not through logic or evidence, but through sheer pressure to belong. To him, solitude wasn't loneliness. It was liberation. It was the one condition where you could think your own thoughts without them being warped by the gravitational pull of the group. He believed that only in solitude could authenticity survive, and for the intelligent, authenticity isn't optional. It's oxygen. But here's the tragedy. Society doesn't see solitude this way. It interprets withdrawal as weakness, independence as isolation, autonomy as failure to connect. People ask, "Why don't you come out more? Why don't you join us?" They see solitude as a problem to be solved, not a necessity to be respected. And so the intelligent person ends up doubly misunderstood. First, for seeing too clearly, and second, for needing space to recover from the very clarity that sets them apart. This misunderstanding creates a painful cycle. Intelligent people retreat to protect themselves, but society punishes them for retreating. They're called antisocial, arrogant, depressed. The reality is far simpler. They're protecting their sanity. They're choosing the environment that allows them to thrive. They're refusing to betray themselves any longer. And in a world that constantly demands masks, the courage to go unmasked, even if it means going alone, is one of the bravest choices anyone can make. So, solitude becomes more than survival. It becomes a declaration, a statement that says, I will not trade authenticity for acceptance. I will not sacrifice depth for comfort. I will not conform just to belong. It's not about rejecting people. It's about rejecting the terms of belonging that require self-betrayal. It's about saying, if the only way to connect is to lie about who I am, I'd rather be alone and honest than surrounded and false. And that's where the intelligent loner begins to find their power. Not in the crowd, not in the applause, but in the silence. In the quiet moments where the mask drops, the mind breathes, and the self returns. That's when survival becomes strength. That's when solitude transforms from exile into home. But if solitude is survival, what does that mean for the battle intelligent people must fight every day against social pressure? How does constant exposure to other people's expectations warp individuality? And why does the intelligent mind so often feel like it's fighting to protect its very independence? One of the most invisible battles intelligent people fight isn't with others, but with the constant pull of social pressure. Human beings are wired to belong. From the earliest tribes to the modern workplace, survival has always depended on group cohesion. The group protects, the group provides, the group decides what's normal. But here's the catch. Belonging comes with a cost. To fit in, you must bend yourself. You must smooth out your rough edges, soften your voice, hide your doubts. And for the intelligent person, that cost is unbearable. Because every time you bend, you feel yourself breaking. Psychological independence. The ability to think your own thoughts, make your own choices, follow your own convictions, isn't optional for the intelligent. It's their lifeline. Without it, they suffocate under the weight of conformity. But society doesn't make independence easy. Society thrives on groupthink. It wants agreement, not dissent, consensus, not clarity. And the more intelligent you are, the more clearly you see how dangerous this is. You can watch your individuality being slowly chipped away, not by force, but by the subtle erosion of constant exposure to other people's opinions. Think about how this plays out. You have an idea, something original, raw, maybe even groundbreaking. You share it with friends, and instead of encouragement, you're met with blank stares or awkward silence. Suddenly, you start second-guessing. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's too weird. So you adjust the idea, tone it down, shape it into something safer. Next thing you know, your original thought is gone, replaced by something more palatable, something that fits better with the group. Multiply that process 1,000 times, and what's left of you? Not much, just a carefully edited version of yourself, molded by other people's comfort zones. This is what Schopenhauer warned about when he described the corrupting force of the crowd. He understood that the collective doesn't destroy individuality in one dramatic blow. It erodes it slowly, silently, through constant pressure to align. Your taste in music shifts to match your peers. Your political opinions soften to avoid conflict. Your goals adjust to what others deem realistic. Over time, your originality isn't stolen. It's surrendered, not because you chose to give it up, but because you didn't notice how subtly it was taken. For the intelligent person, this process is terrifying because they can see it happening in real time. They notice how easily people absorb group opinions as their own, how quickly individuals abandon their convictions in exchange for approval, how much of what people call independent thought is really just recycled consensus. And when they feel that same pressure working on them, bending their will, reshaping their instincts, they recoil. They know what's at stake. They know that surrendering to groupthink doesn't just mean fitting in, it means losing themselves. This is why intelligent people so often choose solitude over company. It's not arrogance. It's not disdain for others. It's self-preservation. It's the recognition that the crowd is too powerful, too seductive, too corrosive to individuality. If they stay immersed in it, they'll eventually start bending in ways they can't undo. And the thought of that loss, the loss of self, is more terrifying than the loneliness of isolation. Better to stand alone and remain authentic than to dissolve into the crowd and become a stranger to yourself. But here's where the paradox deepens. Society claims to celebrate individuality. It praises innovators, thinkers, leaders. It tells people to be themselves, to think outside the box, to stand out. But in practice, those who truly think differently are punished. You can be unique, as long as your uniqueness doesn't threaten anyone. You can be original, as long as your originality entertains, not disrupts. You can be smart, as long as you use your intelligence to reinforce the consensus, not challenge it. The moment your independence threatens the group's comfort, you're labeled difficult, antisocial, arrogant. The message is clear: be yourself, but not too much. And that double standard is maddening. It teaches intelligent people that their individuality is only welcome when it's convenient. Their insights are only valued when they flatter the group's illusions. Their uniqueness is only tolerated when it can be packaged, sanitized, and sold. But raw authenticity, that's dangerous. That shakes the foundation. That makes people uncomfortable. And so, society pushes it away. This is why the fight for psychological independence is so fierce.
Hate.
For the intelligent person, it's not about ego, it's about survival. To remain authentic in a world that constantly demands compromise requires vigilance. It requires boundaries. It requires the courage to say no when the group demands your silence, and the courage to walk away when the group punishes your honesty. It requires the willingness to be misunderstood, even disliked, rather than bend so far that you lose sight of yourself. But this fight is exhausting, because the pressure never stops. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every group interaction is a tug of war. Every opinion you express is weighed against the risk of rejection. And after years of this, even the strongest minds grow weary. That's when solitude becomes not just a refuge, but a battlefield won. By stepping away, you reclaim the ground that constant conformity threatened to take. By retreating, you preserve the one thing society cannot be allowed to erode: yourself. And here's the tragedy. Society doesn't see this fight. It only sees the withdrawal. It labels the intelligent person antisocial, disconnected, cold. It assumes they don't want connection, when the truth is, they want it more deeply than anyone. They just refuse to accept a version of it that requires betraying themselves. They crave relationships built on authenticity, but those are rare. They crave conversations that go beneath the surface, but those are scarce. And rather than dilute their thoughts, fake their feelings, or reshape their soul, they choose solitude. Not because they don't value connection, but because they value it too much to settle for something false. This is what makes the intelligent loner so misunderstood. People assume they're running away from others. In reality, they're running toward themselves. They're protecting their independence, guarding their authenticity, fighting for the right to live as who they truly are, not as who society demands they be. And while that fight often looks like isolation from the outside, on the inside it's an act of profound courage. But this courage comes with consequences, because when you refuse to bend to the group pushes back. It labels you. It ostracizes you. It rejects you. Which raises the next question. What happens to intelligent people once society has branded them as different, difficult, or weird? How does the world treat those who refuse to conform? And what toll does that misunderstanding take on their lives? The moment intelligent people step outside the crowd, they invite labels, not thoughtful labels, not accurate labels, lazy ones. Society doesn't stop to ask why someone chooses solitude or why they refuse to participate in shallow rituals. Instead, it slaps on the easiest explanation: antisocial, weird, arrogant. To the group, difference isn't a mystery to be understood. It's a threat to be explained away. And the easiest way to neutralize that threat is to mislabel it. Take the loner, who values depth over noise. To themselves, they're preserving their sanity, conserving their energy, and protecting their authenticity. But to others, they look standoffish, cold, aloof. People whisper, "He thinks he's better than us," or "She's just too sensitive." They don't see the struggle beneath the silence. They don't see the exhaustion of constant pretending. They don't see the cost of living divided between what you know and what you're allowed to say. They only see someone refusing to play along, and that refusal makes them uncomfortable. And discomfort must be explained. If someone steps away from the crowd, it threatens the group's belief that everyone wants what they want. Everyone enjoys what they enjoy. To admit otherwise would mean questioning whether their own lives are shallow, their own illusions fragile. It's easier to project the problem outward. The loner must be broken. The thinker must be arrogant. The one who refuses must be defective. That way, the crowd never has to confront the possibility that the outsider might actually see something they don't. This is why intelligent people are so often misunderstood. Their motives are invisible. Their silence is misinterpreted. Their solitude is pathologized. People assume they're avoiding connection because they lack social skills, when in reality they're avoiding performance because they value connection too much to fake it. They're not cold. They're careful. They're not arrogant. They're exhausted. They're not antisocial. They're selectively social, but subtle truths rarely survive in the noise of groupthink. So the labels stick, and the intelligent person is forced to wear them like ill-fitting clothes. History provides countless examples of this dynamic. Innovators, philosophers, artists, many of the greatest minds were dismissed in their own time as eccentric, antisocial, even insane. Van Gogh died misunderstood, his genius dismissed as madness. Nikola Tesla lived much of his life alone, mocked for ideas that were centuries ahead of their time. Even Einstein, now hailed as one of the greatest thinkers in history, was ridiculed early in his career for theories that challenged the scientific consensus. What all these figures shared was not just intelligence, but the courage to stand apart and the punishment of being misunderstood for it. And yet, here's the paradox. Those same figures who were mocked, ignored, or labeled weird in their time are celebrated today as visionaries. Society loves to worship outsiders in retrospect, but in the moment, it resists them with every tool it has: ridicule, rejection, mislabeling. Because society doesn't actually want disruption. It wants stability. And stability requires painting the disruptor as defective. Better to call them arrogant than admit they might be right. Better to call them broken than admit they might be whole in a way the group isn't. This is the cycle intelligent people face in their daily lives. Their insights are often dismissed, only to be validated later. Their depth is ridiculed, only to be recognized in hindsight. Their solitude is pathologized, only to be reframed as brilliance once it produces results. But in the meantime, they suffer under the weight of being misunderstood, and that suffering is real. Because being mislabeled doesn't just distort how others see you, it distorts how you see yourself. When you're constantly told you're too much or not enough, you begin to question your own instincts. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I am arrogant. Maybe I should just go along. Slowly, doubt creeps in, and with it comes self-censorship. You hold back more, speak up less, shrink your world to avoid further misunderstanding, and in doing so, you confirm the very labels you despise. You appear distant because you're tired of being misread. You appear cold because you've learned that warmth is exploited. You appear arrogant because you've stopped explaining yourself to people who don't want to listen. Misunderstanding becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But here's the truth: being misunderstood is the price of authenticity. If you refuse to bend your thoughts to fit the crowd will never fully grasp you. If you refuse to dilute your depth for shallow conversations, shallow people will call you distant. If you refuse to fake enthusiasm for illusions, those invested in illusions will call you cynical. And that's okay, because the alternative is worse. The alternative is betraying yourself just to avoid being mislabeled, and no label, no misunderstanding, is heavier than the weight of self-betrayal. This is where intelligent people begin to shift their perspective. They realize that being misunderstood isn't proof of failure, it's proof of integrity. If you're always understood by everyone, it means you've blended so thoroughly into the group that you've lost your edges. You've surrendered your difference, your uniqueness, your authenticity. But if you're misunderstood, it means you've dared to stand apart. You've dared to see differently, think differently, live differently, and difference will always invite misinterpretation. Schopenhauer would have argued that this is precisely the role of solitude, to protect the self from being eroded by the misunderstandings of the crowd, to provide a space where labels can't reach you, where you can be who you are without having to defend it, explain it, or translate it. In solitude, there's no need to fight against the endless tide of mislabeling. There's only you, unfiltered and unmasked. And that freedom, while lonely, is also liberating. But here's the cruel twist. Society punishes solitude while celebrating its results. It mocks the thinker who withdraws, but applauds the discoveries they make in isolation. It ridicules the artist who retreats, but worships the art they produce. It labels the loner as broken, but consumes the breakthroughs solitude makes possible. It wants the fruit without respecting the tree. And so intelligent people are caught in a paradox, despised for the very conditions that make their contributions possible. And yet, despite this, many still choose solitude. They accept being misunderstood because the alternative is worse. They wear the labels, endure the ridicule, suffer the loneliness, because they know the only way to remain true to themselves is to step outside the crowd. They understand a hard truth that society may never celebrate them in the moment, but authenticity is worth the misunderstanding. Integrity is worth the labels, and solitude, though painful, is worth the price. So, what does this mean in practice? It means that highly intelligent people don't isolate because they hate others. They isolate because they've learned the group can't meet them where they live. They isolate because they've realized being mislabeled is better than being erased. They isolate because solitude, for all its loneliness, is still less painful than betraying themselves in exchange for shallow belonging. And that brings us to the next revelation. If solitude is misread as weakness, what did Schopenhauer see in it that made him call it the natural habitat of intelligent minds? What did he understand about the relationship between solitude and creativity, authenticity, and truth that society continues to miss. Arthur Schopenhauer, for all his dark and often brutal takes on life, saw solitude not as a punishment, but as a necessity, especially for the intelligent. He believed that the world was built for the average, not the exceptional. That society's rhythms, values, and rituals were designed to keep the majority comfortable, not to allow the few to flourish. And because of this, solitude wasn't an escape. It was the natural environment for minds that couldn't or wouldn't compress themselves into the tight confines of group life. To Schopenhauer, solitude was where intelligence found its true voice. He described it as the condition in which the mind is most free, free from the demands of consensus, free from the illusions of the crowd, free from the constant pressure to conform. In solitude, the intelligent person no longer has to dilute their thoughts or ration their authenticity. They no longer have to pretend to be entertained by the shallow or satisfied with the trivial. Instead, they can follow their thoughts wherever they lead, however strange, however inconvenient, however unsettling. Solitude creates the space for originality, and originality rarely survives in the crowd. Think of it this way. A bird does not apologize for preferring the sky to the ground. A fish does not apologize for needing water instead of air. Why should an intelligent person apologize for needing solitude instead of constant socializing? Schopenhauer believed that for some minds, solitude was as natural and necessary as oxygen. To demand that they live without it was like demanding that a bird give up flight or a fish live on land. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was impossible, and history supports him. Almost every major breakthrough, artistic masterpiece, or philosophical insight came not from crowded committee meetings, but from moments of isolation. Newton formulated the law of gravity while sitting alone under a tree. Einstein's theory of relativity emerged from years of solitary thought experiments. Beethoven composed his greatest works in the midst of profound isolation, cut off from the world by deafness but connected to it through his genius. These weren't exceptions, they were patterns. Solitude is the soil in which depth grows. Without it, originality withers under the weight of conformity. But Schopenhauer took it further. He argued that solitude wasn't just useful for creative breakthroughs, it was essential for authenticity. In groups, people inevitably bend. They smooth their words, hide their doubts, reshape their desires to match the collective. Even the strongest personalities can't resist the gravitational pull of consensus forever. Solitude, by contrast, is where you return to yourself. It's where you rediscover what you think, what you value, what you want, without the noise of 1,000 other voices pulling you in every direction. It's where you remember who you are when nobody's watching, nobody's judging, nobody's demanding you play a part. And that authenticity, Schopenhauer believed, was worth every ounce of loneliness it cost, because while group life may bring comfort, it rarely brings truth. The group thrives on illusions. Illusions of harmony, of righteousness, of importance. Solitude strips those illusions away. Alone, you can no longer hide behind applause, likes, or group approval. Alone, you confront the raw reality of yourself and the world. It's uncomfortable, sometimes even terrifying, but it's real. And for Schopenhauer, reality, even when painful, was always preferable to illusion. This perspective reframes solitude entirely. It's not a failure to connect. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a deliberate choice to value authenticity over acceptance, depth over distraction, truth over comfort. And while society may label the solitary as antisocial, what it misses is that solitude isn't about rejecting connection. It's about rejecting performance. Intelligent people don't isolate because they hate humanity. They isolate because they can't keep lying to themselves in order to belong. And solitude is the only environment where they don't have to. But Schopenhauer didn't stop at philosophy. He saw solitude as psychological necessity. He warned that constant socializing dissipates the mind's energy, scattering it in shallow interactions until nothing meaningful remains. Every trivial conversation, every forced laugh, every small talk about weather or gossip drains mental fuel that could have been used for thought, creation, insight. Solitude, by contrast, conserves energy. It focuses the mind. It allows deep thinkers to operate at their natural speed instead of throttling themselves down to match the pace of shallow chatter. Without solitude, the intelligent mind is like a race car forced to crawl through traffic. With solitude, it can finally hit the open road. And here's the irony. Society benefits enormously from the fruits of solitude while ridiculing the practice itself. It mocks the thinker who withdraws, but celebrates their discoveries. It criticizes the artist who retreats, but consumes their art. It labels the philosopher as difficult, but quotes their wisdom centuries later. The world wants the results of solitude without respecting the solitude itself. But Schopenhauer would argue that you can't have one without the other. You can't expect genius to thrive in the noise of the crowd. You can't expect authenticity to survive in the storm of conformity. You can't demand breakthroughs from people while denying them the space they need to think. So, what does this mean for the intelligent loner? It means that solitude is not just survival. It's their natural habitat. It's not a punishment for being different. It's the ecosystem in which their difference can finally breathe. It's where clarity sharpens, creativity ignites, authenticity resurfaces. In solitude, the weight of pretending falls away, the pressure of conformity dissolves, and the self emerges whole again. That's not loneliness. That's liberation. But there's still a darker truth to confront. Because while solitude may be the intelligent person's refuge, intelligence itself can become its own trap. The smarter you are, the more you see. The more you see, the more you withdraw. The more you withdraw, the more you're misunderstood. And the more you're misunderstood, the more isolated you become. It's a vicious cycle, one that threatens to turn solitude from a choice into a cage. Which leads us to the next question. How does intelligence become its own prison? And what does it take to break free from the cycle of clarity, withdrawal, and exile? Here's the paradox at the heart of everything we've explored. Intelligence, the very quality celebrated as a gift, can just as easily become a trap. It's like holding a torch in a dark cave. You think the light will guide you out, but often it only reveals how deep and endless the cave really is. What begins as clarity turns into burden. What begins as insight turns into isolation. And what begins as strength turns into a cage. The trap works like this. The more intelligent you are, the more you see what others miss. At first, that feels empowering. You recognize patterns nobody else notices. You predict outcomes before they unfold. You spot flaws in arguments that others accept without question. But slowly you realize this gift comes with a cost. Seeing too much means you can no longer join in sincerely. You can't laugh at the illusion once you know it's a trick. You can't celebrate the plan once you've spotted the cracks. You can't immerse yourself in the crowd once you've seen the strings pulling it along. And so, what feels like vision becomes alienation. You see too clearly to belong. That's the first layer of the trap. Awareness isolates, but it doesn't stop there. Because once awareness isolates you, you start to withdraw. At first, it's subtle. You decline a few invitations, stay quiet in a few conversations, carve out extra time alone. But eventually, withdrawal becomes habit. You retreat more often. You speak less frequently. You protect your authenticity by rationing it into smaller and smaller doses. And the more you withdraw, the less people understand you. They see your silence and label it coldness. They see your solitude and label it antisocial. They see your refusal to play along and label it arrogance. And suddenly, you're not just isolated, you're mischaracterized. This is the second layer of the trap. Isolation breeds misunderstanding, and misunderstanding makes the isolation worse, because now when you try to connect, people already see you through the lens of their labels. They assume your depth is superiority. They assume your solitude is rejection. They assume your silence is judgment. And so, instead of being met halfway, you're pushed further away. The very attempt to bridge the gap only widens it. By this point, the cycle is in full motion. Intelligence creates clarity. Clarity creates withdrawal. Withdrawal creates misunderstanding. Misunderstanding creates rejection. Rejection reinforces solitude. And solitude, while healing, also deepens the sense of exile. You start to feel like you live in a different world entirely. Not just a different perspective, but a different reality. Others seem content with illusions that to you are transparent. Others seem satisfied with rituals that to you are hollow. Others seem happy with answers that to you are absurd. And so the divide grows until it feels unbridgeable. This is the third layer of the trap. Exile becomes identity. At a certain point, you stop even trying to belong. You accept the labels, accept the loneliness, accept the fact that most people will never understand you. Solitude ceases to be a refuge and starts to feel like a sentence. And yet you can't go back. You can't unsee what you see. Can't unknow what you know. Can't undo the awareness that set you apart in the first place. The trap is complete. Intelligence has given you clarity, but at the cost of belonging. It has given you vision, but at the cost of connection. It has given you insight, but at the cost of peace. Schopenhauer understood this vicious cycle. He saw intelligence not as a gift society celebrates, but as a burden it punishes. The crowd, he argued, doesn't want those who see too clearly. It wants those who reinforce the consensus. It rewards the entertainers, the validators, the comfort givers, the truth teller, the outsider, the one who exposes the cracks. That person is cast out. And intelligence, by its very nature, produces more truth tellers than the world knows what to do with. But here's the most devastating part of the trap. The intelligent person often begins to believe the problem is them. When you've been told enough times that you're antisocial, arrogant, cold, you start to wonder if it's true. When you've been excluded often enough, you start to believe you deserve it. When you've been misunderstood long enough, you start to doubt your own clarity. The trap isn't just external, it seeps inward. It convinces you that your difference is a defect, your solitude a flaw, your authenticity a mistake. And that belief can be more destructive than the exile itself. So, what's the way out? Schopenhauer's answer was brutally honest. There is no way out, at least not in the sense of rejoining the crowd. You can't unsee the truth to fit back in. You can't shrink your mind to satisfy the group. You can't pretend ignorance once you've tasted awareness. The only escape is to stop treating solitude as a prison and start treating it as home. To stop chasing belonging where it will never be found and start building a life in the spaces where your difference is not a curse, but a condition for growth. In other words, the trap only dissolves when you stop resisting it. And this requires a kind of courage that few are willing to embrace, the courage to be misunderstood. Because that is the real cost of intelligence. If you see differently, you will be misunderstood by those who don't. If you think deeply, you will be mischaracterized by those who don't want to. If you refuse to bend, you will be rejected by those who thrive on consensus. But misunderstanding is not failure. It is proof that you are living authentically in a world built for conformity. This is the final layer of the trap. And the only way to dismantle it, to accept misunderstanding as the inevitable price of truth, to recognize that solitude is not exile, but alignment, to embrace the fact that you will never be fully seen by the many. And that's okay, because you don't need the many. You need the few who can meet you where you are. You need the rare souls who understand your wavelength, however far apart they may be. And until then, you need the courage to walk alone. So intelligence may be a trap, but it's also an invitation to live differently, to reject the easy comfort of illusions and choose the harder path of authenticity, to stop apologizing for what you see, even if others never will. And if that means being misunderstood, so be it, because being misunderstood for who you really are is better than being celebrated for who you're not. We've traveled a long road through the hidden burden of intelligence, the prison of awareness, the exhaustion of pretending, the rejection of truth-tellers, the necessity of solitude. And now, at the end of this journey, the question remains, what do we do with all of this? What do we do with the loneliness, the alienation, the constant cycle of seeing too much and belonging too little? Schopenhauer's answer, and the answer echoed by many who've walked this path, is both simple and brutally difficult. You embrace it. You accept that being intelligent means being misunderstood, and you stop apologizing for it. Because here's the truth. If you're smart enough to see through illusions, you're never going to be fully understood by people who still believe in them. If you're perceptive enough to catch manipulation, you're always going to be called too sensitive by those who thrive on it. If you're creative enough to think outside of conventional frameworks, you'll always be labeled weird by those who cling to conformity. And if you need solitude to function at your best, you'll always be misjudged as antisocial by those who can't imagine wanting to be alone. That's not your failure. That's the price of difference. The real trap isn't in being misunderstood. The real trap is believing you have to erase yourself in order to be accepted. It's the belief that you must dilute your depth to be loved, censor your thoughts to be included, mask your authenticity to belong. That's the slow death of the self, and for the intelligent, that's far more dangerous than loneliness. Because solitude may hurt, but self-betrayal destroys. Solitude may isolate, but it leaves you whole. Pretending may connect you, but it leaves you hollow. Schopenhauer knew this. That's why he defended solitude so fiercely. He saw it not as a flaw, but as the natural habitat for certain minds. Just as wolves belong to the wilderness and dolphins belong to the ocean, some people belong to the quiet spaces where thought can roam free. To drag them into constant crowds is to suffocate them. To shame them for needing silence is to punish them for their nature. And yet society continues to do it. It insists that solitude is wrong, that being different is wrong, that refusing to perform is wrong. They know that solitude is not a prison, but a sanctuary. And this sanctuary isn't empty. It's where the breakthroughs happen. Solitude births originality. Solitude cultivates authenticity. Solitude restores the energy drained by endless pretending. It's not a space of absence, but of presence. The presence of your true self, your true thoughts, your unfiltered creativity. When you stop fearing solitude, you begin to see it for what it is. Not loneliness, but alignment. Not exile, but freedom. Not weakness, but strength. So, what's the takeaway? It's this: stop apologizing for your solitude. Stop apologizing for your silence. Stop apologizing for needing different conditions than most people. You're not broken. You're not antisocial. You're not arrogant. You're simply wired differently. And the world has never been kind to those who refuse to conform. But the world has always depended on them. Every leap forward in human understanding came from someone who dared to stand apart. Every revolution in thought, every masterpiece in art, every breakthrough in science came from someone who chose authenticity over acceptance. The crowd never birthed originality. Only solitude did. That's why the courage to be misunderstood is the final key. Because once you accept that others won't get you, their rejection loses its power. Once you stop needing validation from the crowd, their labels lose their sting. Once you embrace solitude as your habitat, not your punishment, the cycle of isolation turns into a cycle of creation. Instead of being drained by pretending, you're energized by authenticity. Instead of being wounded by rejection, you're strengthened by alignment. Instead of being trapped by intelligence, you're liberated by it. Yes, it's lonely. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it means walking roads fewer people travel. But it also means living a life that's truly yours. A life unbent by the weight of conformity. A life where your thoughts, however misunderstood, belong to you. And that is worth every ounce of solitude it costs. So here's the challenge. The next time you feel misunderstood, don't see it as failure. See it as proof that you're living authentically in a world built for conformity. The next time you retreat into solitude, don't see it as exile. See it as returning home to the only place where your mind can breathe. Or the next time someone labels you antisocial, arrogant, or weird, don't internalize it. Recognize it for what it is. Their inability to understand what you see, not your inability to belong. You don't need to shrink to fit them. You need to expand into yourself. Because the world doesn't need more conformity. It doesn't need more comfort givers. It doesn't need more actors in the endless play of illusions. What it needs, what it has always needed, are people willing to stand apart, to think differently, to embrace solitude, and to bring back insights that could never have been born in the crowd. And if you are one of those people, if you've ever felt the burden of intelligence pressed down like a weight you can't escape, remember this: you are not broken. You are not defective. You are simply playing a different game on a different frequency, with a different set of rules. So embrace your solitude. Trust your insights. Stop apologizing for what makes you different. The world may misunderstand you now, but it will always need the clarity you bring. And even if it never recognizes you, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you remain true to yourself. Because authenticity, even in solitude, is worth more than acceptance bought with lies. In the end, Schopenhauer was right. For many highly intelligent people, society isn't their natural habitat. Solitude is. And that's not a tragedy. It's a truth. One that frees you from the endless prison of pretending and allows you to finally, fully, unapologetically live.